Everybody, welcome. Welcome, everybody. We're just going to gather everyone while we're going live on Facebook. If people want to do a watch party on Facebook, we encourage you to do that. You can go to the Disability Voices United Facebook page, and you can start a watch party from that.
And we are now live on Facebook.
Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. My name is Judy Mark. I'm the president of Disability Voices United, which is an organization directed by and for people with disabilities and family members. I'm also one of the co-chairs of Disability Vote California, which is a California statewide organization that empowers people with disabilities, family members, and professionals to vote in the upcoming election. And it protects their rights to vote. We have an amazing program for you today. But before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know who needs Spanish interpretation, how they can access that. It is in the chat, but I'm also going to ask our interpreter, Lorna, to explain it in Spanish. Lorna, go ahead.
Para las personas que hablan español, llamen al 551-241-6310. De nuevo, 551-241-6310. Gracias.
Okay, welcome. Thank you. So what we do with all of our at the beginning of all of our Disability Vote California webinars is to start with a Why I Vote segment. And we ask a self-advocate, a family member, and a professional in the field to talk about why they vote and why it's important to them from a disability perspective. So I know that we had a little issue with Zoe Ginsburg. So if you're okay, Kavita, I'm going to start with you. While Zoe is starting her computer. So Kavita, tell us why you vote. Oop, you are muted, Kavita. There we go.
Well, first of all, thank you, Judy and DVU, for giving me an opportunity to share why I vote. I thought about this long and hard, and I just wanted to share this with you. I vote because I vote for two, not just for myself, but also my nearly 15-year-old neurodiverse autistic daughter, who is now becoming painfully aware with each passing day that she's different and that she's often misunderstood because she does not communicate the way most of her neurotypical peers do, almost 75% of them. She may not have verbal functional communication, but she experiences all the feelings of judgment, isolation, seclusion, segregation, but also the positive feelings of acceptance, unconditional love, and compassion. And I am her voice for now as a mother and her ally. That's why I vote. I also vote because I know through my work at Pragna with individuals in the IDDD neurodiverse community that compassion and unconditional acceptance by everyone does wonders to helping people thrive. And I want to be able to elect and foster compassionate leadership who can further the message of Pragna, which is basically being awakened with compassion. I vote because even today, the allocated 40% of the special education funding that Congress can appropriate is not allocated due to the fact that our disability, or the different community, like we like to call it, is not a priority and can seem burdensome to those lawmakers and legislators who are never affected by disability. Our children need all of the support that they can get. It does not take a village, but all of society to come together to support and raise our kids who are developmentally different. And I vote because we need allies in office at different levels of government advocating for and being the voice of not just the neurotypical community, but also the neurodiverse community, who are often forgotten almost all of the time because they don't have a voice. Sean Costello is a developmentally different individual from Dublin who is an amazing self-advocate. He has been running for Dublin City Council for almost 2 decades. And I don't believe he has ever won. And I, like you, may have never heard of him till one of my allies at Pragna called Diksha wrote to me to help get the message out about his campaign on our radio. Her words: Costello is in a wheelchair, he's neurodiverse, but I think he's completely capable and qualified like everyone else and has a vision for a better society. He said he's been running for so many years in the face of failure because if he does not advocate for himself, no one else will. And I realized through my involvement at Pragna that even today, neurodiverse people are not treated like they belong with us. And I would do anything to bring about that change. So Kavita Auntie, like she refers to me, please get the message out. If I were eligible to vote and she's 17 years old, I would urge everybody to vote for him. I'm an ally like Diksha, and it is for allies like her who look up to us to do the right thing, who advocate for the neurodiverse population that I vote. Finally, it is for my daughter Pragna. It is for her ally Diksha. It is for the amazing self-advocates like Sean Costello. It is for compassionate leaders like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late Representative John Lewis, that I will vote because so many lives depend on it. You're muted, Judy.
Thank you. That was so beautiful. I love that. I want to meet this Irishman. That sounds amazing. That sounds amazing. So I now want to call on Zoe Giesberg, who is going to speak about why she votes from the self-advocate perspective.
Thanks, Judy. I'm autistic, and ever since I was a little kid, my parents always stressed the importance of keeping up with the news and following politics, so that we knew what was going on in the world and how it affects us. When I was 3 years old and first diagnosed, I was only able to get civil rights through the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. I was able to go to public school, to college, to social work school because of IDEA and because of Section 504. It is the Olmstead decision the Supreme Court made in 2000, where Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote the majority opinion, that I am able to live in the community, to get services and supports that I need to make the most out of my life and live on my own and be happy and healthy and fulfilled. And it is because of all of these things that I am a social worker, working with people like me to make sure that they have the best lives as humanly possible, to have what I have. It's been a rough road. Everything that has happened in Washington, everything that happens in this state, everything that happens in my city of Los Angeles has directly affected my life. It has directly affected the lives of people like me. I am a community organizer because of this. I am an active member of my society because of this. And I vote because of this. Every day, decisions are being made at every level of government that affects my life, that affects my work, that affects everyone around me. Every day, I tell social workers to pay attention what's going on in the news because it directly affects our line of work. It affects our clients. It affects our ability to function in society. And I am fortunate enough to live in a democracy where I get to hold my politicians accountable when I don't like what is happening. And so I vote to hold them accountable. I vote because I get a say in what they do. And if I don't vote, then I don't get to complain about what happens in the world. It is the most important thing to me that I have the right to say whatever I want. I deserve a good life. People like me deserve a good life. My friends, my family, my coworkers, my clients, everyone deserves to have a good life. And we can have a good life if we vote.
Thank you. That was amazing, Zoe. I agree with everything you said. You do. You do deserve a good life. We all do. Our last presenter for Why I Vote is we're so happy to have you as part of this. Beverly Mendez is the director of the Easter Seals of Southern California and has a really amazing campaign that is being started by Easter Seals to get out the vote for people with disabilities and family members. And so thank you so much, Bev, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Judy. I would just want to say how much I appreciate and value champions like Zoe and Kavita, and thank you for allowing me to join in. The reasons I vote, I would say there are three reasons. Number one is that elections have consequences, and whether we like them or not, we live with the consequences of each election, and we have the power to make choices and stand up for issues we care about, especially disability issues, which are so important to us. Second of all, our vote is our voice for issues that are important to us, whether it's collectively, we can have a voice in disability rights, women's rights, gender equality, LGBTQ rights, environmental issues. This is our opportunity to make our voice heard. And lastly, there are so many champions like the ones we're hearing today, but people who've fought for the right to vote. The right to vote is one of our most valuable constitutional rights. Kavita referenced John Lewis is a personal hero of mine, and one of my favorite quotes of his is, "The vote is precious. It's almost sacred. It's the most powerful, nonviolent tool we have. So go out and vote like you've never voted before." So I would love to share our campaign. Should I go into that now?
Yes, please.
Absolutely. All right. Sorry, let me just get this up and going. All right, so Easter Seals Southern California has launched a Get Out the Vote campaign. So I'm thrilled to be able to share that with you today. Hopefully I can get it up on the screen here. So hold on, there we go. So our campaign is focused, we've launched a campaign this year to get out the vote. Specifically, we want to advocate for the strength of the disability vote. Our message reflects that 1 in 4 adults in the US has a disability. We are 61 million strong. Our campaign will include a small number of billboards such as these and bus shelters in LA, Orange, and San Diego counties. But our campaign is primarily on social media, so everyone can participate and amplify the message. We will have a countdown with important messages on significant dates, culminating on Election Day with an I voted sticker campaign. And so how everyone can participate, we ask that people look for our social media posts and amplify the message by reposting. We ask that everyone go to wearethe25.org. We have helpful dates and resources there. And we also have a social media toolkit in English or Spanish with posts that anyone can share. And that's it, again, at wearethe25.org. So join us in our campaign. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very, very helpful. And certainly aligns, Easter Seals is part of the Disability Vote California Coalition and certainly aligns with everything that we're doing. So we are thrilled that the resources of Easter Seals has moved into this area in such a profound way. We're really, really happy about that. So now we are going to move into the main part of the webinar, and I want to thank Zoe, Kavita, and Bev for being part of that. Some of them may stay on, some of them may drop out. So I just want to thank you before we move forward. So the main part of our webinar, we've titled "Don't Get Mad, Vote," which is actually an expression. I don't know if it was first coined by President Obama, but it's the first time I heard that expression. But it really, to me, encapsulated what we're talking about this week, because we're looking at how elected officials impact every part of the lives of people with disabilities. that we came to this decision to have this because one of our co-chairs, Wesley Witherspoon, who's a self-advocate and spends his career educating other self-advocates on voting, said to me, you know, a lot of people with disabilities don't even understand how government impacts their life. Like they just, when they can't get a service from the regional center or they can't get something to happen, they just get mad, but they don't really know who to aim it toward. They sometimes blame the wrong people. Or, you know, it's kind of like, you know, they call the city government to say, why aren't I getting my Social Security check when that's really the federal government? So we need to make sure that people understand what the different levels of governments are responsible for and how they really impact our lives. And so, so I am so thrilled.
I'm gonna take my break, guys. I'll be back in a minute.
Oh, I'm so thrilled that we have been able to get the collection of folks that we have today. Particularly honored. Wait, before I start the introductions, I want to tell folks how to ask questions. So you're not going to be able to ask questions through a typical like meeting on a Zoom. The way we're doing it is you can either ask a question through the chat, although that's not my preferred method. The best way to ask a question is through Q&A, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, and it has two little like word bubbles in it. That is the best way to ask questions. So we need to, so if you could just put your questions there, that way I'll be able to follow them and acknowledge when they've been answered. We also have a backline of Spanish speakers, and we may ask specifically if there are any questions coming from that line as well. All right, so let's get started. So our first presenter is Allison Barkoff, who's the Director of Advocacy for the Center for Public Representation. And for those of you who don't know this amazing national civil rights organization, I highly recommend you check out their website. I personally use almost every one of their materials in the work that I do, that it educates me on the rights of my son and people and other people with disabilities. So we are so thrilled. The other thing that I want to mention is that she is also a family member, and she has a brother with a disability who I'm sure has been the reason she got into this field. And so, so I want to thank you, Allison. She's joining us all the way from the Washington, D.C. area, and we really appreciate you getting on with us. Go ahead, Allison.
Okay, great. Let me put up my slides real quick. Okay, can people see my slides? Great. So I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. There's nothing that I think is more important than making sure that people with disabilities and family members know what's at stake in elections. And what Judy asked me to talk about today is really all the things when you go out to vote that you're going to impact. I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm going out to vote for president and that's the only thing, but I'm going to talk a little bit about all the ways that people's lives are impacted by the federal government and tying that to your vote. And hopefully it will motivate you to get out the vote. So what are things that are important to our community? I know that you guys have had, it sounds like Judy said, over 30 webinars, and I'm sure you guys have spent a lot of time talking about each of these issues. But things like healthcare. So people are very concerned about, how do I get health insurance? Am I going to be discriminated against because I have a disability? What's going to happen to the Affordable Care Act? Will I be able to access the kind of doctors that I need? So those are a top priority, I think, if you ask across the disability community. People with disabilities want to live and fully participate in their communities, and it's, for many people, they need home and community-based services. They have different names in different places. In California, I know you have different waivers. You have the IHSS program. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about community-based services. And it's a probably #1 priority for our community. education. When we heard one of the speakers earlier about why she votes, you know, education and inclusive classrooms and making sure students with disabilities get full access to education is incredibly important. Employment, we have Easter seals on, and I know that they have been a champion for competitive integrated employment and people with disabilities being able to work in real jobs in the community at fair wages. So another area where people with disabilities care a lot. Access to integrated and affordable housing, a major priority. Voting, making sure people with disabilities can access polling places that and are not discriminated against in voting. And as the last speaker spoke about, disability cuts across every single demographic. We approach this intersectionally, and civil rights across the board are important. Not only disability rights, but the rights of women, the rights of the LGBTQ community, the rights for communities of color, and the federal government impacts all of these areas. So I'm going to talk about how disability community priorities are impacted by every part of the federal government. So one part of our federal government, and I'm going to start there, I probably would have flipped the order, but for the fact that people are thinking right now in a very important way about the Supreme Court. So I'm going to start by talking about the judicial branch, which has the US Supreme Court, but it also has trial courts and appellate courts that decide federal issues. The second part of our government is the legislative branch, that's Congress. And so when you go and you're voting on the Senate, on your senator and on your representative, I'm going to talk about some of the major issues there. And then the executive branch, people certainly think about the president, but I'm going to talk about all of the federal agencies that are part of the executive branch, how that's connected to your vote, and all of the priorities on disability issues that are there. So I want to start off as other folks have on, you know, really talking about the loss to our community by the passing of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Not only was she a champion for equality across the board, but she decided and wrote the majority opinion of the centerpiece of the disability rights legal world, the Olmstead versus LC decision, where the Supreme Court said that people with disabilities have a civil right to live and participate in their communities, and that it violates the Americans with Disabilities Act to unjustifiably segregate people, whether it's segregation in institutions, whether it's segregation in sheltered workshops or segregated schools. Olmstead covers all of that. And I just want to read a few words from the Olmstead decision, because I think Justice Ginsburg's words really capture the harm that people with disabilities experience when they're segregated from their communities. And segregation, in her words, perpetuates unwarranted assumptions that people are incapable or unworthy of being part of community life. So what it says is that we don't think people with disabilities are us, and that's why it's wrong. But she also talked about why segregation really harms people is because they don't get to do the things that everyone else gets to do that makes life meaningful. So she said it diminishes everyday life activities like family relations, social contacts, work options, economic independence, educational advancement, and cultural enrichment. So the Supreme Court and the decisions that come out of the Supreme Court are so important. What does the Supreme Court and federal courts do? So what they do is, you know, people think about laws, they're passed by Congress, but it's actually the courts that decide what those laws mean and when they've been violated. So for example, federal courts might decide when there is a challenge brought under the Americans with Disabilities Act to cuts in home and community-based services. There's been a number of lawsuits in California when they proposed to cut important services that help people be in the community, or lawsuits like Olmstead lawsuits against states that overly rely and invest in institutions instead of in community services. They also decide whether federal laws that are passed by Congress or are unconstitutional or illegal. So I think probably most people have heard about the Affordable Care Act, and the courts have been deciding, is the Affordable Care Act, including its protections for all people with pre-existing conditions and people with disabilities, is that legal, as the Republicans have been challenging this law? Probably another thing you've talked about on this call is the public charge rule that has to do with immigration and people who might use public benefits, including home and community-based services. And many of us, including folks from the disability community, have been filing lawsuits in federal court trying to say that this rule is illegal and it's discriminatory. So courts are very important to the rights of people with disabilities. So what does that have to do with your vote? Well, federal judges are nominated by the president and have to be confirmed by the Senate, and they serve for life. That's different than probably what you're used to in your own state, where state judges run and they're elected for a term. And who the president is makes a difference. The president nominates people who share what we call their judicial philosophy. So are they someone who wants to broadly read the civil rights laws and the protections? Do they come from an experience of understanding what exclusion and discrimination is like? I was able to, I was a former clerk of Justice Sotomayor, and she's someone who brings that experience to the bench, very different than some other justices. And even though judges are not supposed to be political, nominations, as everyone knows and has been seeing in the paper, especially for the US Supreme Court, are very political and are very tied to your vote. So that's the judicial branch. The second branch is the legislative branch, or Congress. And Congress plays a very important role in disability issues. So they pass federal laws, they pass the federal budget, to keep federal agencies running, and they confirm appointees, both judges and heads of agencies. And they also are the part of the government that is involved in impeachment. And as you know, when you go to vote, you vote for your 2 senators and for your representative. So what are some important things? What are the important issues that you might want to think about when you're voting for your senators and your representative? I'm sure everyone in California and everyone who's joining this call has been involved in nonstop advocacy to try to get Congress to pass a COVID relief package that meets the needs of people with disabilities. And one of our core priorities has been, we need more funding for home and community-based services. That hasn't been part of a package yet that's passed. There's been a fight between the House of Representatives and what's in the bills they would like to pass and the Senate. And you should look at the record of your senators and your representative when you're thinking about that. Healthcare. Congress has been voting on a lot of different bills. So around universal health care, around prescription drug bills, and what is your representative and senator's positions? Around home and community-based services, Money Follows the Person, which is a federal program that helps people leave institutions like nursing homes and developmental centers and move to the community, is an important bill, as well as funding for home and community-based services through the HCBS Infrastructure Investment Act. Employment. Bills have been introduced to end subminimum wage. That is right now legal to be paid to people with disabilities. And there are bills to expand opportunities for what we call competitive integrated employment, or just it's really real opportunities to work in real jobs in the community, just like people without disabilities. There are bills on raising minimum wage, and that's really important for direct support professionals and people who provide supports to people with disabilities. Education funding, voting protections, policing. So these are all the kinds of issues that you will want to look at when you're making your decision about voting for your senators and your representatives. The last piece is the executive branch, and the president is the head of the executive branch, and that is the only position that you vote for. But a lot of people don't know that the executive branch actually includes all of the federal agencies. And the president, the person that we vote for, appoints the heads of federal agencies and sets the direction for major priorities and policies, and that federal agencies actually implement and enforce the laws that Congress passes, and they implement other federal programs. So here's just a few examples of federal agency policies that impact people with disabilities, and you should think about what each of these agencies will look like under each of the presidential candidates and what they have said will be their priorities for those agencies. So for the Department of Health and Human Services, that's the federal agency that oversees healthcare, they have a lot of policies about healthcare coverage. They are charged with implementing the Affordable Care Act. Lots of policies about Medicaid and home and community-based services. And for people who are familiar with it, that is the agency that is part of putting out guidance about the HCBS settings rule, which is about making sure that people with disabilities have basic rights and access to the community in all HCBS settings. They also have an Office of Civil Rights that oversees healthcare discrimination. And we've been hearing a lot about that during COVID-19, including people with disabilities being denied access to life-saving care. And that's an important area in Health and Human Services. At the Department of Justice, and that's a place both I have worked in my past at the Department of Health and Human Services as well as DOJ. And at the Department of Justice, that is the agency that enforces civil rights laws, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, including Olmstead. And so we want to know, what does the president think is this going to be a priority area for them? At the Department of Housing and Urban Development, that's where policies around affordable housing and fair housing policies come. And there's been a lot of changes in this administration and different views about fair housing than under past administrations. In the Department of Education, there's not only special education policies that are very important, but vocational rehabilitation services are also under the Department of Education, and policies around competitive integrated employment. In the Department of Labor, they enforce wage laws, and that includes the sub-minimum wage laws that I was talking about, as well as policies like family and medical leave. And then there's the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission that has to do with employment discrimination laws, and that also includes the ADA. So when you think about the president and you think about your vote, please consider what the priorities are in all of these different areas. And I'm just going to end by saying the disability community has an important voice in this election. Our votes matter. Getting out the vote is so important. Educate yourself about candidates' positions and what that means for the disability community. And I think most importantly, especially with COVID, make sure you have a voting plan. Know what the rules are in California about early voting or mail-in voting. Have a plan. Our voice matters. So much is at stake in this election. I have a couple resources on my slides. The American Association of People with Disabilities has a Rev Up campaign, and there's a great voting guide that the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network has put out. And finally, if you're a social media person, on Twitter, there's the hashtag #CripTheVote. That is a great place to follow. They have a lot of Twitter chats that happen, have candidates on, and it's a great place to educate yourself. So with that, I will turn it back over to Judy.
Oh, that was incredible. Like, I was literally, as you were doing it, texting everybody I know going, you got to get on, you got to listen to this, because you got to understand this stuff. So that was amazing. Thank you, Allison, so much. So I'm just going to get a few questions out there right now that people have asked. One of them is a really basic question about what is the ADA?
That's important, and I'm sorry, I should have explained it more. So the ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we just celebrated the 30th anniversary of the ADA. And the ADA is a federal civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. And it has different parts. Some of it is about you can't discriminate against people in employment. Some of it is about in places of accommodation. So when you're out in the community, you know, that you have to be able to access buildings, to be able to go into stores when you go to your doctor's office. And then there's a part of the ADA that is about public services. That's what any kinds of services that the state of California offers, that your county offers, that your town offers. And all of those have to be accessible to people with disabilities. And a really important piece of the ADA is about inclusion and integration. And there is something called the integration mandate that says people with disabilities have to be offered services in the most integrated setting. So they can't say, like in the Supreme Court decision in Olmstead, that if you want to get services and supports, you have to live in an institution and we won't give them to you in the community. So that integration mandate is really why we have a civil right to be part of and get supports that you need to live and work and participate in your community.
Wonderful. That was really helpful. I have some more general questions that I want to give to everybody. So we've now learned about the federal level, very, very important, and what they're responsible for. We're now going to move to the state of California, and I'm really happy to introduce Eric Harris, who's a legislative advocate at Disability Rights California, which is one of the big partners on the Disability Vote California campaign. So Eric's going to really kind of walk us through how the state really impacts the lives of people with disabilities. Go ahead, Eric.
Absolutely. Thank you, Judy, so much. As you said, my name is Eric Harris. I'm a legislative advocate with Disability Rights California. Disability Rights California is the protection and advocacy nonprofit organization here in the state of California that protects and advocates on behalf of people with disabilities. And we do that in several ways: through lawsuits, through legislation, and through advocacy. So thank you, Allison. You did a great job in terms of really giving a big picture and really giving people some great information on the federal level and on especially the three branches of government. And I'm going to focus a little bit on the legislative branch here in the state of California, as well as the executive branch. As a legislative advocate, one of my roles is to help state legislators create and form legislation that impacts all Californians. So let me first give you kind of an overall perspective on this year's election. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the election is coming up in November here in the state of California. And just some general thoughts. It's really important this year in particular. You've heard people all throughout the country saying it over and over again. You've heard media types say it. You've heard entertainers say it. You've heard advocates say it. This is the most important election in our lifetimes up to this point. And it is so crucial for us to vote. It is so crucial for us to vote early. As many of you are aware, there have been issues in the Postal Service, in the U.S. Postal Service this year. A lot of that information can confuse voters. A lot of information involving mail-in voting and voting in person can be confusing this year. So for many voters who are voting either for the first time or those of you who have voted for many, many years, this election will be different. So I encourage, and a lot of the advocates at DRC have encouraged voters to vote as soon as possible. As soon as you get your ballots, please vote. So that's a little bit kind of as big picture Now I want to give you guys some information on state laws here in the state of California. And a lot of this will be reinforcing what is done at the federal level, but done at the state level here in California. And for many of us who, when we were in elementary school or middle school, we got to watch videos on the voting process. We got to watch videos on the bill process and how bills become laws, and how those can impact people here in the state of California. So first of all, the way we can get bills is advocates and whether they're self-advocates, legislative advocates, or just ordinary citizens can bring up ideas that matter to them, ideas and issues that they see on a regular basis. So whether it has to do with education, whether it has to do with police reform, whether it has to do with voting, we bring those issues to our state legislators and let them know that these problems are impacting us, their constituents, on an everyday basis, and we want to see them changed. So that process is an important one because the only way that legislators can know that these issues exist is if constituents let them know that these are current issues and that they matter to their constituents. To give you some information about our state legislature, it's important to know California has 40 million people. 40 million Californians throughout the state are represented by state legislators that work in the state capitol on our behalf. As was said earlier, we are in a democratic republic. We are able to vote on certain issues directly, but we are also represented by state legislators both at the assembly level and then at the Senate level. State assembly members represent about 500,000 people in the state of California, each member of the state assembly. There are 80 members of the state assembly here in California. There are 40 members of the state senate here in California. Each member of the state senate represents about 1 million people here in California. As many of you know, 1 million people is more than a lot of states. You go throughout, especially the middle parts of the country, and you have states that don't have 500,000 or 600,000 people. So it is really, really important that we are aware of who our state assembly members are, that we are aware of who our state senators are, and we hold them accountable based on the decisions that they make, the records that they have, and how they represent, especially people with disabilities. So the way that the legislative process works here in California, after you bring a bill idea to a state legislator, that legislator works with other advocates and other stakeholders to really work on how that language will impact the communities that they represent and really all Californians. Because the process has to go through not just that assembly member or that state senator, but the rest of the state senate, the rest of the state assembly, then cross over and be voted on by the other house. So if it starts in the assembly, a bill has to be passed through committees, gets to be heard publicly, then it has to pass through the state assembly. Once it passes through the state assembly, it goes across to the state senate. It then has to go through committees at the state senate level, be voted on at those committee levels, then get voted on by the state senate. Once it goes through that entire process, after it passes through both houses in the state legislature, it then gets presented to the governor. And many people see the governor all the time. We hear about who our governor is. Gavin Newsom, of course, is our governor. And we will see him kind of as a front page, big headline person. And the truth of the matter is he represents 40 million people. He has a lot of legislative an executive authority as our governor. He is able to sign bills into law or veto bills. Signing bills into law. So once a bill goes through the legislative process, passes both houses, the Assembly and the Senate, it gets presented to the governor. The governor gets an opportunity it's the sole opportunity he has, of course, advisors and his staff, but it's ultimately his decision, Gavin Newsom's decision, to sign or veto bills. Once that occurs, most of the time, if he signs a bill, that bill will go into effect the next year. So a lot of times there's confusion whether a bill happens either immediately, and there are certain circumstances where that can be the case. But for the most part, bills that go through the California State Legislature and are signed by the governor go into effect the next year. So they'll go into effect if a bill was just signed, if a bill was signed into law just now, it'll go into effect in 2021, January. So that's kind of the legislative and brief executive process regarding bills becoming laws after they have been signed by the governor. There are two major bills that I wanted to talk to you guys about that really impact voting in California this year. And in particular, I want to focus on how they impact voters with disabilities, because oftentimes these bills are put into law, and the community that is often forgotten about is the disability community. So let me talk to you guys about two major bills. First, I want to talk to you about AB 860, which is a bill that was signed into law earlier this year by the governor. AB 860 is a bill that would require county elections officials to send mail-in ballots to every registered voter in the state of California. Now, this is a bill that has gotten a lot of attention, not only in California, but nationwide. As Allison said earlier, there have been discussions at the federal level on whether mail-in ballots are reliable, whether they are consistent, whether people can abuse the system by getting more mail-in ballots than they should. And we had a lot of those discussions. As a legislative advocate, somebody who works on voting bills, we had these discussions among other advocates, among the legislators, both on the Democratic side and the Republican side, and informed them specifically about the impact that this bill could have on the disability community. There are many people with disabilities who might have a difficult time traveling to their polling place. There are many people with disabilities who prefer to vote from home, who prefer to use mail-in ballots. And this bill, AB 860, clears up a lot of potential confusion, especially in the era of COVID. One of the main arguments and discussion points that we had as a disability organization was that during COVID, people with disabilities are in a vulnerable situation. Many people with disabilities have pre-existing health conditions. Many people with disabilities need to separate themselves as best they can from other people to remain safe. And we've seen earlier this year in primaries in other states, when voters vote in person, when there are a lot of people who vote in person and mail-in balloting is not an option or not as prevalent of an option, COVID cases have gone up. In the spring and early parts of the summer, places in the Midwest had in-person voting and did not have as many options for mail-in ballots. And we saw the numbers go up. And a concern that we had was that we wanted to make sure that people with disabilities can remain as safe as possible. They can vote, but they can do it safely. Another bill that kind of goes along with AB 860 is SB 423. Now, SB 423 is an interesting bill. It actually requires that a certain amount of in-person voting be available. So obviously, we recognized, advocates, disability advocates, voting rights advocates recognized that in-person voting was going to be different this time around. What we did not want to have happen, even during COVID, was for elections officials for the state to eliminate all in-person voting options, because specifically speaking for the disability community, people with disabilities in some cases need to be able to vote in person. There are circumstances where a person with a disability might need extra assistance, might need to use accessible voting options, accessible machine voting, or other circumstances where just in-person voting is the best option for certain people. Some people don't have reliable opportunities to get to their mailbox, or countless other issues that can come up for individuals with disabilities that require some of them and some of us to go to in-person voting. We advocated really hard to make sure that there was going to be enough in-person voting, that there was going to be accessible options, that there were going to be accessible options for in-person voting. So, those are some issues that we know have been discussed, in particular during the times of COVID. DRC and other voting rights groups have been keeping our eyes on other potential developments. There are certain counties that might not have as many in-person voting options as other counties. So it's important for all voters, for all of us, and especially voters who we know ourselves, and we know if we might need additional accommodations, we know if we'll need additional assistance. It's important that as soon as possible, it's right now September 24th, we still have a little bit of time, but that time will fly by. It's important that as soon as possible, you research as best you can, you make phone calls to your county registrar, and find out what you might need to do to vote, whether it's by mail, in person, or if you need additional accessible options, making sure that we do that as soon as possible. So that's something that DRC in particular is advocating for, and we want to make sure that everybody gets their opportunity to vote for this upcoming election.
Thanks so much, Eric. Really, really helpful. There was a lot. One of our attendees in particular was asking 20 questions for you. I'm going to wait because I think that it's questions that others can answer as well. We've started at the federal level, we've moved to the state of California, and now we're going to move to the local level. And while each locality, each city, each community, county does it differently, we went for the biggest city, my city, the city I love, the city of Los Angeles, to ask how city governments really, what they're responsible for in regards to people with disabilities. So you've heard what the state can do, you've heard what the federal government can do. It's different at the local level. What we ask for and what we advocate for are different, and what we hold city officials accountable for. And I'm really, really so honored to have, now I don't know how to pronounce your last name, so I'm going to try it. Jeffrey Stranieri? No? How do you pronounce it?
Like basically there, Stranieri, yes, perfect.
Stranieri, okay. We've Americanized it. It was probably
Exactly.
Stranieri at some point when your ancestors immigrated here.
That's right.
Okay, so Jeffrey Stranieri is the ADA compliance officer for the city of Los Angeles. We've all learned that ADA stands for Americans with Disabilities Act. Cities are also responsible for ensuring that that there is compliance with it and that we're following that law. So Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for having me here today. This panel has been fantastic. I mean, the overview from the federal considerations and with Allison and Eric taking us through the state considerations, I have very little to add, but I'm going to try my best here to give us the local perspective. My name is Jeffrey Straneri. I am the ADA compliance officer for the city of Los Angeles. And I am within the structure of the Department on Disability, one of the 44 departments within the city. And our executive leadership is Mr. Stephen David Simon, and he, as general manager, assures that we in the department are advocating both on the public side and within the political machine itself. Our mayor, Mayor Eric Garcetti, has spoken often and passionately that Los Angeles should be the most accessible city in the nation, and we work with that mantra every day. So, along with the 15 council members that comprise the 15 council districts here in the city of Los Angeles, we have quite a number of individuals who have an interest in overall advocacy for persons with disabilities. And I guess I'm going to try to spend a few minutes and let everybody know how that machine works. If I sort of go back a few minutes here and take from Allison's federal perspective and the allocation of dollars and budgets and how our elected officials through committee and allocations and so on end up providing the states with the funding. And then as Eric was mentioning, once we have our state officials, your senators and your assembly persons, both under the governor's executive leadership, ultimately there's the allocations down to the various counties, and from the counties into the cities, and ultimately within the cities you also have then smaller communities. So there are a lot of considerations, and there's a lot of dollars at stake that really need to be, the return on the investment needs to be as critical a consideration as any. And particularly right now, this fiscal year, obviously in the city of Los Angeles, there are challenges with COVID-19 effectively having upended everything that we had put in to the budgets. We really need to look closely at how we are going to maintain the appropriate funding for persons with disabilities, particularly my constituency and that of the Department on Disability. As that is paramount to our department, it's interesting that at this time, with the passing of Justice Ginsburg, that we are so tied to the federal government in a way that, yet again, not foreseen that this would be such a consideration, and yet the judicial branch and ultimately how persons with disabilities are perceived in terms of civil rights, how that really all, when you extrapolate it across all the various branches of government, how it really affects Angelenos and where we are today here in the microcosm that's our city. What I'd like to talk about is a little bit about voting and some of the challenges here in the city. I'll try not to retread too much of what the other speakers said, but please keep in mind that the challenges faced nationally really are similar to the ones we face here locally. And a lot of it has to do with access in and of itself. There is, of course, the physical access, but we have the program access. We have the tenets of what they call Title II, which is the outward-facing aspect of government providing for the public, access to the goods, the services, the activities, the programs, and the physical structures in which the public will interact with its government officials. The challenges now, in particular, All you need to do is look at recent testing sites for COVID-19 and see the challenges of how you implement massive programs when there is a catastrophic level of upheaval in the systems, right? And we've had a chance at the Department on Disability through all my colleagues, whether it's the community outreach folks, whether it's everyone on the AIDS coordinator's office, and all of our concerns about the homelessness and all the things that we deal with at the Department of Disability. Really, we're still really barreling right towards Election Day and how we are going to most assist persons with disabilities and making sure their vote counts. I have read recently that approximately 1 in 5 voters who will cast votes are persons with disabilities. That's a large number. That is a big number of people to accommodate, and whether reasonable or not, that accommodation has got to be made. The protections are in place, again, that everyone has the opportunity to vote, and we're going to make sure that possibility remains a probability and explicitly accomplished. The challenges today really have to do with something Eric was talking about, some of the legislative motions that are happening with mail-in ballots and some of these things. In Los Angeles, over previous election cycles, we've tried to well, how do we get more time? We have these baseline code requirements, and we have the protections of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And here in California, we have the California Building Code, which dictates, the physical access and things. But baseline and real world experience are two different things. And what happens is, because polling places are, in houses of worship or at schools, or they're in all these random different locations, it's hard to say one size fits all. And so what you find is that a location might have an area that's good but not so good, also within the same footprint of that location. And so how can we address these things to make sure that no matter where a vote is cast, that the accessible elements are in place? We do that by a number of ways. There are checklists that the United States Department of Justice provides. These checklists can be used to evaluate a location, so that before a person with disability arrives to cast their vote, that the challenges are known, whether that's a ramp access, whether that's doorway access, whether it's the machine or the device itself, whether the etiquette and the protocol piece is in place for the volunteers who work there. The volunteers themselves are often, there's not an element of maliciousness, it's that they don't know, that they didn't know how to help, right? And we want to make sure that we're providing that support to the entire process. It's more than just the physical location. It's actually engaging the individuals who are going to provide the advocacy and the assistance, that they know what to do, right? This is an outreach piece that's critical. It has nothing to do with the mail-in ballot. It has nothing to do with the machines. It's how can we help people help themselves to cast their vote? And this is a really important part of what we're trying to do at the Department of Disability, which is to first and foremost raise awareness among the community that you can vote. We will get you you are empowered to cast your vote. And there are many people who want to make sure that no matter how that vote is cast, that the opportunity remains. And there's a lot to be said now, again, to sort of go back a few minutes to the COVID circumstance, with how we accommodate people who both need to go to a physical polling place versus people who will remain in their homes and cast their vote. How to mitigate confusion about, you're reading about in different jurisdictions elsewhere in the nation about 2 envelopes over a single envelope. There are many people for whom the act of sealing an envelope just might not be possible. Okay, there are a lot of things that even when you get to the opportunity to actually cast the vote, that there are barriers in place that may not have been contemplated. We need to go beyond what everybody assumes is out there and think ahead preemptively. You have to have the wide angle view with this, and there's never been a more important time, at least, I'm sure that this is uttered every election cycle, but I can tell you that, my 51 years, I've never experienced anything with as many challenges sitting from where I'm sitting now ever before. So with all that said, I want to just express to anyone who's joining us here today, that the advocacy is real, the advocacy is deep, it's intimate, personally, professionally, with the Department of Disability, with your city council, your elected city councils, the neighborhood councils, your committee members, all the various community groups that are really looking out to make sure that persons with disabilities are not excluded, that this is an inclusive city, that this is again to repeat the words of our Mayor Eric Garcetti, we are here to make Los Angeles the most accessible city in the nation, and that includes certainly any of the civic concerns, such as casting votes. I'll open the opportunity for questions from everyone who's scrolling through here, but I hope that was adequate enough for your forum.
That was fantastic. Really, really helpful. And boy, it is really a challenge this year on so many levels. And you're having to work from home. So it's just like adding that on top of it where you can't sit around a conference table and really like hash out the answers. So that's tough. So Anika, I saw probably one of her children, which is one of the challenges of us working from home, run in behind her. It's really okay, Anika. We all get it. We totally get it. I'd now like to introduce, so we've learned about the federal government, the state government, we learned about city government, Los Angeles being a huge city, but there's obviously very tiny cities in this as well. But now we're going to look at counties. And counties have an important role for people with disabilities as well, which is actually different than what cities' roles are, even though I'm sure they interact on a daily basis. So I'm really, really so happy to introduce Anika's son. Is that your son or your daughter? I can't see the whole body. Oops, your voice is not coming through. Your microphone's a little bit off. You sound a little bit like a robot, which is probably something your kid did to your computer system. Still not hearing you, Anika.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's a little
Give me 1 second.
It's like the cord needs to be plugged in a little bit better. All right, so Anika Chowdhury, everybody, is the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Public Affairs for Alameda County Healthcare Services Agency. And Alameda County is up in Northern California, and we're so happy. I know that you've all been really, really supportive of people with disabilities. So go ahead, Anika, let's see if your mic is working.
I decided to give up on the headphones, so I assume it's better. Sorry if it's a little echoey. And you'll definitely hear my son come back in whenever he feels like it.
That's fine.
It's not a thing right now. So thanks very much for that, Judy. I'm really glad to be here and to be able to share some of Alameda County's information. If you don't mind, I'll share a few slides if that's okay.
Absolutely, go right ahead.
Yeah, so I think we were asked to just sort of provide an overview of what counties do in general. And so California has got 58 counties spanning both urban, rural, suburban landscapes. And each of the counties has a board of supervisors that governs it. And they run the gamut anywhere from 5 that cover a giant place like LA County and a giant county like Alameda County. And then San Francisco has 11. And San Francisco is a city and county. So just, a lot of variation throughout the state. And counties serve both local functions and state functions. So in a lot of, especially the safety net programs, counties are the extension of the state government in implementation. So for example, the Medi-Cal program, right? It's a state and federal program, but it's administered at the county level. County funding is used to provide the state match for drawing down more federal funds, et cetera. And then within the counties, there are cities, and each of the cities has its own governing functions, but then within the unincorporated areas of the counties, counties provide all of the city functions as well. And so needless to say, the counties are basically California's safety net and are critical for serving underserved populations and people with disabilities. And then in terms of common service areas, that you'll kind of see across all of the counties, you can basically break them down into health and human services, government services, public safety, public protection, and any infrastructure and land use stuff, although the land use is generally, again, in the unincorporated areas. So just a little bit about Alameda County as an example to walk through how our county provides some services. So we are a county of 1.67 million people, and about 1 million of those people are aged 18 to 64. We have about 10% of our adult population identified as having a disability, and another 8.6%, or there's probably a lot of overlap there, of people who are living below the federal poverty level, who are adults. Here is a map of our county, and the 5 supervisorial districts split up. They're generally done by population, and so D1 has a lot of rural space. And here's just a snapshot of our county's budget for the 1920 fiscal year. And as you can see, a lot of spending in healthcare services, a lot of spending in public assistance. And so public assistance is, a lot of the programs that are in our social services agency. And another big chunk in public protection. And then multiple other smaller pieces. Our county is unique in that we do have a Measure A1, which is a dedicated funding stream to provide healthcare services in the county. And this money is 75% of it goes to Alameda Health System, which is our safety net hospital system, but it's not administered by the county. And then the other 25% is administered by the county to make sure that people have access to healthcare. So it includes administering Health Pack, which is our program for people who don't qualify for Medi-Cal, Medicare, or other insurance programs. And then lastly, I'll just note that Alameda County is one of the most diverse counties in the state as well. And we place a big emphasis on equity, both in terms of health equity, race equity, and income equity wherever we can in our programs. So next, I'll just kind of go through some of the programs that we have available for assistance. And these are pulled out of our budget book that's produced every year. And so basically, if you want to know, what a government is doing, you want to look at their budget. So general assistance is basic, monthly grants of about $336 to $548 for people who don't have any other source of income. This is often provided for people experiencing homelessness, as well as other people who just have no other means of support. And oftentimes people who are receiving general assistance are also receiving other services, and so we try and connect them together. Homelessness, again, a really big issue throughout the state and the nation at this point, and a lot of overlap with people who have various levels of disability. So Alameda County last year had more than 8,000 individuals who were identified as being unsheltered, and nearly 80% of them were being unsheltered, meaning they were living on the streets and or a shelter. Or in vehicles. And so we recently did we have a lot of programs for homelessness that are also connected to other programs, but we recently developed an Office of Homeless Care and Coordination to sort of help coordinate the services that are provided both at the county level, but then at the city level. We have 14 different cities in our county, and so just wanting to make sure that we're leveraging all of the efforts that we've all put into this. And because the services we provide are cobbled together from various funding streams. So you've got Mental Health Services Act money, you've got general fund, you've got state homelessness money, federal homelessness money. And so we're really trying to make a move toward increasing housing options for people, and at the same time coupled with other programs to prevent people from being evicted and losing their housing in the first place. Aging and adult protection. This is a part of our social services agency. And the programs here include programs for adult protective services, the public guardian and conservator, which often is supporting families and individuals with who've lost capacity to manage their finances, the public administrator's office, as well as county veteran services. And we also recently launched an aging and older adults website, and the idea being that we want to be able to provide all of it's a one-stop shop for older adults to be able to come and find information that they need about county programs or other supports, etc. In-home support services is another example of one of those state programs that's administered at the county level. And the idea here is that, we provide home care for people who are older and people who have disabilities so that they can not be institutionalized and can stay within their own communities. And so this is a program where we're serving nearly 25,000 people as of last year, or as of earlier this year. This public authority health program, the 22% receiving services, this is what I was talking about with the connection to Medi-Cal. And then on the behavioral health side, this is another county service that is provided under the agency I work for, and we provide the full gamut of services, so including mental health, prevention services, as well as treatment services, substance use disorder programs, and as well as housing and vocational services for people. So through our Mental Health Services Act programs, we do full service partnerships, which include, making sure that it's full wraparound services for people who might need a combination of housing, health, and other disability supports. And the idea is to, provide the person with everything that they need so that, again, we can keep them in the community as long as possible. And then finally, the last one I'll end with is that we also have a Developmental Disabilities Planning and Advisory Council. And this is a council that is a little bit of a hybrid government/advocacy body, and our public health department staffs them. And the idea there is to, ensure that that as government programs consider funding and programming, and that we take the needs of the developmental disability community into account as we're thinking about policies and programs. So that's it for me, and I'll stop there in case there are any questions.
That was so great. Really helpful. Really, really helpful for us to learn the different pieces. Okay, so we have a lot of questions. I'm going to ask all of our speakers to come back on, but while I do that, I'm just going to promote our webinars for next week, because so we have spent the last 5 weeks learning about government, learning about why we should vote, learning about the options for voting, how to vote, which there's a lot of questions right now in the Q&A about how to vote, and we'll revisit that, and we always will. But starting next week, we're actually going to start plotting through the ballot in the state of California. So we're going to start having some candidate forums. We've invited both, if it's 2 people running, we invited both candidates to appear. We've asked for a representative of both the Trump and Biden campaigns to present. We are also going to go through, we have so many propositions on the California state ballot this year, some of which have a really direct impact on people with disabilities, whether it's increasing or decreasing funding to the state, or whether it is whether it provides access to us in certain ways. And so we're going to take about 5 of those propositions, and we're going to be asking representatives from the support and opposition groups of those propositions to appear on webinars. So next week, I'm really happy to announce that we, on October 2nd, are having 2 separate candidate forums, or a candidate open. Oh, it's not really both the candidates at the same time. From 12 to 1 on Friday, October 2nd, we're inviting Senator Holly Mitchell, who is running for the LA County Board of Supervisors. She's going to be taking questions from constituents who have disabilities and family members and professionals in her supervisorial district, which is in LA County and has about over 2 million people in her district. So that LA County supervisors are extremely important and powerful. Then at 3 p.m. the same day, we're having Lanira Murphy, who is running for state assembly in the San Fernando Valley against Assemblymember Nazarian. We will have Assemblymember Nazarian speak the following week on October 6th. And we're going to be doing this probably several times a week, having a half an hour to an hour with candidates or with their candidates' representatives if it's for a very, obviously, I seriously doubt that President Trump or Vice President Biden will be appearing on our webinars, but we will certainly hoping to have representatives from their campaigns. We are nonpartisan. I want to make that very, very clear that we're a nonpartisan coalition. Although we have very, very clear views on disability. So let me make that case. So I'm going to ask a couple quick questions to quick people, and then we're going to play a little game that I came up with as I was listening to you talk. So just to make it exciting. So one of the quick questions is about voter drop boxes. And I know that that is not necessarily a federal issue. It's actually not even a state issue, but it is sort of a local county or city. And I'm wondering so there's a specific question about the city of LA, when they're going to be established and will they be ADA compliant, but I'm not sure if Anika, if you know the answer to that as well. When are we going to, those drop boxes for us as a community are so critical because it allows us to avoid the post office, but at the same time allows us to, make sure that our vote is counted and not have to do it in person. So I don't know, Jeffrey, if you know that answer?
I don't know the answer as to additional drop boxes beyond traditional USPS, U.S. Postal Service boxes. I certainly have written it down now. But there, again, the broader voting by mail is really a hot topic, really at the top of the advocacy concerns. And I can't imagine that if it was possible to do, that we wouldn't do it. So allow me some time to get some answers and I'll report back here.
Yeah, there was actually an article in the LA Times that talked about over 200 drop boxes in LA County, not just the city, but in LA County. It may be a county thing that's happening as opposed to city, but Anika, do you know what's happening in your county?
Yeah, so the Alameda County Registrar of Voters has a map actually for 24-hour drop boxes locations. And so they've got about a map of 66 out right now. I can't tell if they're ADA compliant, but I would recommend that, you go to the County Registrar of Voters site and they'll be updating that information on an ongoing basis as they're trying to do these things. Because I think with COVID, they're needing to sort of adjust a lot of things and how they do it.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing with LA County, that they're going to be adding additional drop boxes because of COVID. And for those who don't know what a drop box is, it's going to look a lot like a mailbox, except it's going to have lots of printing on it that says for ballots only. I'm going to say this, I say this at almost every webinar. You don't forget to sign the envelope. You must sign the envelope or else your ballot does not count. So it's really, really important you sign your envelope. It's also really important specifically for people with disabilities that signature in some way resembles the original signature when you register to vote or potentially on your driver's license or state ID. So we know that a lot of ballots are thrown out. Up to a quarter of ballots are thrown out in certain states where the signature was forgotten or the signature doesn't match. And so not only do we have to make sure people vote, we have to make sure people vote, in a way that gets their ballot counted. So that is a critical thing. Somebody also asked about some dates, and I don't know if you have them off the top of your head, Eric, on dates for when people can register to vote in the state of California. By the way, our website, disabilityvotesca.org, has all of these dates all over it, but for this webinar's purpose, Eric, could you just fill people in?
Yeah, so I don't have the dates on the top of my head. I know that registration is active right now. I believe it was either yesterday or the day before was National Voter Registration Day. So people can register, but as far as certain specifics as we get closer to election day, I know that that certain ballots, most ballots I think are going to be mailed out in the next week or so. So keep an eye out, everybody keep an eye out in your mail for when ballots will be sent out.
Yeah, and so I know that next week, this week, starting tomorrow, the counties are starting to send out those big books. In fact, some counties have already sent out the big books going over everything that's on your ballot. So you should really all have received them by next week around the state. Don't forget, as long as we're talking about deadlines, the census is due on September 30th. If you've not finished the census, please do so. That has a direct impact on the amount of funding and the amount of representatives, federal representatives that we have. And so please, we've already done a whole webinar just on the census. But if you have not, then I want you to stop what you're doing. I am fine if you get off our webinar and go fill out the census. It is really critically important. All right, so I'm going to play a little game with you all. And so I can see all of you. So we're going to have you raise your hand because I hear these questions all the time. Like, who do I call for this? And in some cases, it's going to be, you could call anybody, any different level. Okay, so somebody is having a problem because their child with a disability who receives special education is having a lot of problems with distance learning. And they are really unhappy. Raise your hand. So Allison's representing the federal level, Eric's representing the state level, Jeffrey, you're at the city level, Anika, you're at the county level. Raise your hand if you're at the level where somebody can complain about this. So it's the city and the county and somewhat of the state. So really, so Jeffrey, you want to explain how LAUSD integrates with the city and how school districts are really at more the city level?
Yeah, in some cities, there's mayoral control of school districts. In our city, it's a standalone. The board itself is an elected body. However, being the second largest school district in the nation, LAUSD has challenges that exponentially larger than what we might find in other jurisdictions. The city of Los Angeles and its elected council members work very closely with Los Angeles Unified School District to make sure that certain considerations such as the special education allocations or what have you are being met. I personally have worked very closely with LAUSD over the years. I stay very close with their facilities folks because a lot of our sidewalks and some of our curb cuts and our traffic signals are shared spaces effectively. The surfaces that are on the perimeter or the peripheral of LAUSD campuses are also within the purview of the city of Los Angeles' public works programs. And so when you start, at least starting with that collaboration, it's a natural extension to go into the programmatic issues. And within the Department on Disability, our community outreach and education folks certainly can help advocate for the hypothetical constituent you're speaking to. That hypothetical constituent is not really hypothetical. It exists everywhere, and we get a lot of calls about it. So I'd like to offer up the Department of Disability as a first stop within the largest city structure to provide assistance for this individual.
Thank you. Anika, you also raised your hand.
Yeah, so I was raising my hand from the perspective of a health department, a county health department where we have discretion over when schools open, right, because of the COVID situation. And so, but I think that it's really important for all parents to know that the state has allowed small cohorts of students to be able to be brought on for in-person learning. And so schools have that option right now, and we've been encouraging all of our schools to take up that option, especially for kids who have higher needs, and distance learning is just not an option for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I can say that here in LA, we have, the state has given us that option, but the LA school district has not taken up that option up. And I know a lot of families who are really upset about it, because there's a lot, people are regressing, the students are regressing, they're falling through the cracks, and it's really been not great. Okay, next question. People with developmental disabilities, so a person with a developmental disability is really unhappy about the fact that they're getting denied services, and they believe that they're getting denied services because there is a systemic issue around race. So maybe there is a racial and ethnic disparity that is playing into the issue of why they're being denied community-based services. So raise your hand if this is an area that is a concern. And Eric, you should be raising your freaking hand, because DDS should be pulled in there. So Allison, let's start at the federal government and talk about what that means.
So as I mentioned, there are a couple different federal agencies that oversee federal laws. And the one that came to mind, if someone is being denied services and discriminated on the basis of race, is there's an Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Health and Human Services, and individuals can file complaints there. There's some types of cases that could be filed both with the Office of Civil Rights and HHS, but you also might have, if there are some disability issues, think about the Department of Justice, and you can file, if this is about race and disability and there were some disability issues, you can also file individual complaints with the Department of Justice. So those are two places when you think there are violations of federal laws that you can go to in the federal government.
Great, thank you. Eric, I'm going to you next.
Sounds good. So as you said, DDS, as many people who I'm sure are participating in this webinar know, have had their issues when it comes to discrimination, when it comes to people feeling like they've been treated unfairly or unequally. So our route is definitely to go through the statewide organizations like Disabilities California, like Disability Voices United, and others that advocate for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities on a statewide level. But also we're civil rights organizations as well. So something that DRC prides itself in, and I know many of the other disability rights organizations pride themselves in as well, is fighting for equality for all people with disability and those who intersect with disability and race, disability and gender, and disability and sexual orientation, and others, where we make sure that we do our part to not only advocate when we see possible legislation or possible bills that impact people who are of different racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, and others, but how those can intersect with disability and how those people can be impacted. And so that's definitely an important topic for DRC, and I know all the other disability rights organizations that are involved in this.
And, I should mention that, for those folks who receive services through regional centers receive funding from both the state government and the federal government. And so that means that if you feel you're being discriminated against on that level, you have two levels that you can get remedies from, let's say. And so I think it's always important to know that for every dollar that is spent by the state for people with developmental disabilities, it's matched by at least 50 cents by the federal government, which means they have a stake in the way we are receiving services. They have a financial stake in it, and they want to see better outcomes. All right, next question. I am a person who uses a wheelchair for my mobility, and they just started construction on my street. And so all of the sidewalks are not available to me anymore. Who do I complain to about that? Who is responsible here? Jeffrey? Oh, these are all the levels of government. Okay, let's start at the local level. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Hi. Okay. Well, as you might be aware, we have a rather large civic program called the Sidewalk Repair Program in Los Angeles. It is a 30-year, currently $1.4 billion funding allocation sidewalk repair program that at its core is an accessibility program. It takes some 14,000 miles of sidewalks and curb ramps that are either in disrepair or need to be installed, and this program is citywide. There are often, during the course of construction, barriers created on top of the barriers sought to be removed, right? And there are a number of ways that the field crews themselves have deployed to make sure that accommodation, access, and a route of travel, both safe and accessible, is deployed with each project. That could be a number of what they call K-rails. That could be a number of bollards. It could also be a rerouting of traffic in the street so that an entire lane could be closed while during the course of construction, access is given until the construction is completed. Please reach Department on Disability if you need any assistance in submitting an access request, which would trigger the sidewalk repair, and along with that, we can join many of your other constituents who are also reporting the sidewalks.
Anika, it's also at the county level, huh?
Yeah, at the county level, because I was talking a little bit about incorporated versus unincorporated, and so in areas of a county where it's not an incorporated city, it's actually the county's responsibility to provide all those city functions. And so just depending on where you live, and so it would be important to call. So in that case, the county public works department would be responsible for that. And when in doubt, call your local elected, and they will find the right person for you.
Mm-hmm. Eric, the state has a responsibility too for this, huh?
Yeah, so let me first say that it would start at the local and county level for sure. They have the easiest, it's the easiest access in terms of getting information to them, and they'll be able to act on it the quickest. But I did want to bring up at the state level, both in the state assembly and in the state senate, there is a transportation committee. And in the description of the transportation committee, among other things, it mentions the fact that they deal with the California High-Speed Rail, California Highway Patrol, California Transportation Commission, Department of Motor Vehicles, Department of Transportation, driver's licenses, freight, regional transportation agencies, transit authorities, intercity rail, mobile source of air pollution, fuels, rules of the road, state highways, local streets and roads, vehicles, aircraft, bicycles, and pedestrian facilities and vessels. Mm-hmm. So local roads and local streets are included on that. So there are definitely, and you'll see if anybody wants to sit and watch a transportation committee hearing, or even just check out the agendas, they talk a lot about certain cities and certain local communities and some of their roads and streets. So that'd also be a good place to reach out to. And I think looking at the list of legislators that are on the transportation committee, you can see kind of who is responsible and who's an expert in this area. And particularly in the Assemblymember Jim Frazier is a big disability rights advocate, especially for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. He's the chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee. So his office would be a great place to start in terms of letting them know if you have issues in your community. And you never know, that'd be not just a local issue, but it might be, in other parts of the state as well.
Great, thanks, Eric. Allison.
Okay, well, I would say definitely start at the local level. It will probably be more effective and quicker. But, you know, as we were talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act, this is kind of exactly a piece that's covered by Title II and requirements that that state and local governments have to comply. So you can file a complaint with the U.S. Department of Justice, and they actually have a whole project called Project Civic Access, where they go in, and if maybe you're in a community where it's not just one time there's a sidewalk issue, but there are a lot of barriers, and this may be more in smaller towns where you can't get into the courthouse, you can't get into the community center, there aren't curb cuts. They come in and they do a whole assessment of the entity and really work on coming up with a plan around access. So there's a piece at every part, but I would say starting local where there's the most control is always the best idea, but sometimes when you can't make progress, you have to amp it up a little, and certainly the federal government and their enforcement authority is important.
Thank you, Allison. I know that Allison needs to leave a little bit early, so I'm going to start with you on this last example for you. So I'm a person with a disability, and I applied for a job, and I disclosed that I have a disability in the process of applying for the job. And then the response that I got from the prospective employer was pretty negative, saying, you know, they're not sure they can accommodate me. And so I didn't get the job. What do I do about that? So I'm going to start with you, Allison.
Sure. Well, that is what the Equal Employment Commission, EEOC, is about. And people can file individual complaints there. And one important thing I haven't talked about on each of these issues, if you can't fix it and you go somewhere like Disability Rights California and you decide like this is a big enough issue that you want to bring a lawsuit, I want to remind people there's kind of the federal courts out there. For employment cases, it's unique, and you actually have to first go to the EEOC before you can go to court and bring a lawsuit. And if they decide not to bring the case, they issue what's called a right to sue letter, and you can go to court. The one thing that I'll just note for people is, you know, always start off at the EEOC, but if it's a disability claim and it's with a public employer, it's something that the Department of Justice also has jurisdiction over. So if you are in that situation, say you're a person with a disability who's been discriminated against, you work for the city of San Diego, you know, if you get sent over to the Department of Justice, don't think back to this webinar and think I was wrong. There are two places that have joint jurisdiction. So that is where at the federal level you can start the process.
Thank you, Allison. And I want to thank you so much. I know you have to run off. You have a lot of webinars in one day.
Yes.
And I want to thank you so much for joining us. It was really phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks. Bye.
So what other levels can people who feel they've been discriminated against in an employment situation go to? Eric, is there something at the state level people can go to?
Yeah, so as Allison said, there's actually a statewide, of course, Department of Justice here in California. And the Department of Justice in California also has a civil rights division. That civil rights division, if you go on their website, they have, it's under the Office of the Attorney General's website, but it lists all of the different categories that they advocate and that they fight for in terms of people's rights. And so, and one of those happens to be workers' rights. So that's definitely an area that the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Justice and the Attorney General, that's their responsibility. So that's on a statewide level. It's sometimes, you know, it could be, of course, challenging as an individual person to go straight up to the Department of Justice and the Attorney General. So oftentimes using organizations, some of the statewide organizations that have certain connections, certain reach, certain ability and staff and kind of assistance to be able to get to some of these folks and communicate with them a little bit more directly, that might be a route that is a little bit easier to go at least at the state level.
Really helpful. Is there any at the local level? Can you file for complaints in employment discrimination?
You know, we have, you know, the Economic Workforce Development Department is, again, a department within the city family. And Department on Disability, when faced with reasonable accommodation concerns or other workplace issues, will partner with the EWDD to advance the concerns. There is a remedy in there somewhere, most often. Oftentimes it ends up in litigation as well, but you certainly can reach out to the Department on Disability or the EWDD, the Economic Workforce Department within the city locally.
Fantastic. Okay, we got a question in the chat, which is also, it's a great question. I'm going to actually make it our last question. What is the best way to address a systemic issue of discrimination against people with disabilities who require increased support needs when service providers who receive state and federal funding won't allow them into their programs, i.e., for example, cherry picking? I love this question because it happened. I have a son who's 23 with autism who was one of those children who was not allowed into certain programs because they said he had too many behaviors or whatever excuse they gave. And I know that Allison's gone, but I can tell you that cherry picking is a very significant concern of the federal government. Being a service provider who receives federal monies, who will only provide supports for the easy to serve, the low hanging fruit, there's a lot of different analogies, is against the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I can tell you that the Department of Justice has looked into this in the state of California historically. And so, so that is absolutely a federal issue. But I'm wondering what else is it? Eric, is it also a state issue?
Yes, it's definitely also a state issue. You brought up the Department of Justice, and I know we brought it up earlier. That's one place at the statewide level where they can impact, of course, any agency here in the state of California that receives statewide funding, DDS, for instance, and other agencies here in the state that receive statewide funding must abide by state laws and cannot discriminate under the laws of the state of California. So that, of course, is one route. We talked earlier about bills and the possibility of the legislative route. I know I didn't discuss it, but of course there's the budget route and the impact that the state budget has on policy in that way. But to be frank, we're in a time of COVID and we're not able to actually go to the Capitol because of the current situation. But whenever the Capitol opens back up, I hope that the people who are participating in this webinar understand the importance of actually being face-to-face with their state legislators, being face-to-face with the folks who are making some of these decisions, being face-to-face with some of the folks who are in charge of DDS and running these programs that are impacting our community members and people with disabilities and their families. Because it is very difficult for them often as community leaders, as elected officials, to see somebody who really needs the services and is telling them, the legislators and the elected officials and the agency leaders, that they have been discriminated against or they're being treated wrong, to tell them basically, keep going, just get over it type stuff. So they won't do that. The more that we hold them accountable, the more that we see them face to face, make phone calls, send emails, all of these things that we can do, I think elevate our position when it comes to the circumstances that we're in as people with disabilities.
Great. So I don't know if that's a local thing, probably not, because it's state and federal funding, but Anika, did you want to add in?
Yeah, I was just going to note that, so to the extent that there is a local developmental disabilities council or, any sort of advocacy group like that, I think it's just important to know if you've got one in your county and plug into it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I have to say there's LA County has a commission on disability. There's the Department on Disability in the city of LA. They have, up in Northern California, we don't have DD councils down here. I've actually not heard of one. Or do they have them down here? I've not heard of one specifically.
Yeah, and I think the other benefit of plugging into organizations like that or your local office of disability is that they can help sort of navigate the very cumbersome bureaucratic process, right? And let you know that like it's this form you need to fill out or you need to talk to this office. And I think that in itself can be a really big help. And also local offices will often provide services in multiple languages and be able to be more accessible.
That's great. Thank you. Jeffrey, do you want to add anything to this, to the final question?
Yeah, just that there, from your elected officials, there are a lot of support folks involved, whether it's field deputies, whether that's special assignments. And when we have a circumstance that comes to our attention, Department of Disability, we may reach out directly to a council member and say, hey, we need some advocacy here at that level. And that symbiosis gets things moving for people who otherwise might not be able to reach them on their own. So I encourage everything to be brought forward again through the Department on Disability as a first stop. And I think we can get you where you have to go.
That's wonderful. Well, I really, this was such an amazing webinar. And for those of you who want to share it with others, we will have it up by tomorrow on the Disability Vote California website. We're also going to get this up on the Disability Voices United website, hopefully in the next few days, if I do my job and approve some of the language to get it up there. It's my fault, it's not there yet. But it is definitely going to be up on the Disability Vote California website, where you can find all of our previous webinars, as well as all of our Why I Vote testimonials. So next week, oh, by the way, if you're not on the mailing list for Disability Vote California, please go to disabilityvoicesunited.org, disabilityvoicesunited.org, join our mailing list, which is right there. You can click on it and you will be able to be part of all of our emails that announce all of our webinars. So I really, really, really want to thank Jeffrey and Eric and Anika and Allison, who provided such an incredible webinar. And I also want to thank Zoe and Kavita and Bev for their testimonies on why they vote. I hope that everybody stays safe out there. And somehow can get through these very, very difficult times we're living in. Thanks, everybody, and take care. Bye-bye.